Okay, hello, Savannah Hauk.
Hello.
So, uh, I'm excited to have you on. Welcome to the Edlow podcast.
I'm happy to be here. I am a listener, so I'm happy to be on the show. But I probably won't listen to myself, but I'm happy to be here.
I hate listening to my own podcasts. It's so funny. I do, because I want to just make sure the audio works well, and I'm always trying to find little clips that I can put out there of things that might draw some attention, and I just hate it. I'm like, God, it just sounds so weird.
Yeah, well, you get used to it though, and so it's
Yeah,
actually a good thing to hear yourself. You can be a better, contributor and speaker. So yeah, it
yeah.
has its own past.
As a lawyer, I depose people all the time, and I do it by video. And when I first started my career, my boss was like, "You need to watch every single one of your depots because then you'll see all of all of your little intricacies. Because there's a transcript, that
Yeah.
comes out of a deposition." And man, that was the most brutal experience. All the ands and ums and terrible questions. And I remember thinking, there were a few depots where I'm like, oh, I crushed that one. And I looked at him and I'm like, this is the terrible. I can't get anything out of this. It was so bad. And I've gotten better over the years. But this actually, podcasting is so different than taking depositions, because in a deposition, most of the time, you kind of know what you're trying to get.
Yeah.
Whereas I come here and I'm not trying to get anything. I'm just trying to hear your story and help facilitate it. And I think it makes me a better attorney when I do depositions, but it's just a different exercise.
Right.
So, it's
I
fun.
don't think you can use StreamYard when you're doing depositions. That's all.
No, no. We do a lot of Zoom. The pandemic really changed the way we practice law. I probably didn't take a deposition for 6 or 7 months because I wanted to be in the room.
Yeah.
And now with Zoom, God, it's so nice when you have a doctor that's 3 hours away and it's a 1 hour depot to not have to drive all the way out there. You know what I mean? It's just,
Yeah.
it's so nice. And so there's still some that I want in the room, but this is great too. And also, it's great for the podcast because you and I would never have an opportunity to have this conversation because you're out in South Carolina, right?
Yeah, 3 hours different from you.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for doing late. I actually just did a podcast with someone in Scotland, and and I had to do it. I think it was like 10 o'clock when I started, 10 in the evening, and it was 6 a.m. at his time. So we were both struggling at the beginning. But anyhow, so you're Detroit born.
Yeah.
And you're an author, you're a podcaster, you actually did a TED Talk,
Two
right?
TikToks.
Yeah, and you identify as dual gender.
Yes.
And so I told you off air, you're the first person I've ever talked to who identifies as dual gender. Maybe you can explain to me what that means.
Well, for me
Mhm.
personally, I can't describe the label for anybody else, but
Right.
bigender, dual gender, genderqueer, gender fluid, non-binary, all kind of live in the same, vacuous umbrella where we are some of one and some of the other. I could be more male, which is 75-80% of my life. I
Mhm.
go to work as male. My relationship at home is mostly male. But then there's times like here with you, or on my Sundays, or when I'm doing advocacy, or when I'm going out on Sunday just to go out, where Savannah lives and breathes and has a life and has an identity and has a presentation such as this. And yeah, it's just I have no interest in transitioning, so I'm
Mm.
a non-transitional transgender person, and as a result, this allows me to fulfill the spiritual feminine nature that I have inside me that needs a voice.
Interesting. So you just referenced something, a non-transitional transgender person.
Mhm.
Perhaps you can explain what that means. Like, maybe give me an idea of what the difference is between transgender and dual gender,
Okay.
what you're doing.
All right. Well, there's two things. There were back in the day transsexuals.
Right.
Transsexual, the term went out of vogue,
Hmm.
and they adopted transgender. But transgender is also a larger umbrella term for
Hmm.
all people who are living across gender.
Hmm.
So even though I'm biologically male, I'm presenting as male and female, and a lot of people do this. So we all live under the umbrella of transgender, But the formerly known as transsexual, the transitioning transgender people, also live under that umbrella, but they're also called transgender. So that's why there's sometimes a disparate misunderstanding where I may call myself transgender and somebody who is physically is a trans man, trans woman, who has gone through surgery or taken chemicals or had bottom surgery, whatever it might say, well, you're not me. Well, I said, no, I know I'm not you. I'm not transgender in the way you're transgender, but we all live under this greater umbrella, which is a transgender umbrella.
You know, it's interesting that you bring this up, and I just wanted to, because I have a lot of friends all across the spectrum of political views and moral values, and some religious, some not. And I think that part of the problem that some people have with this change in culture that we have is that, like you kind of just said, there was kind of blanket terms for all this stuff, transgender, and now it seems like people, because everybody is kind of different, you almost have to break it up into even smaller groups.
Yeah.
So now, instead of having just transgender, or say, someone who is homosexual or lesbian or gay or whatever you want to say, now it's pansexual, and then there's dual gender, and then there's, there are all of these different ideas, and it's like we got to keep track of them all, and not to say that's a bad thing, it's just a different thing, and it would change is hard for people.
Yes, and it doesn't help when the vernacular is so rapidly changing, even within in the 2000s. Before, in 1996, when I finally proclaimed to myself I am a transvestite, I hated the word as soon as I accepted it for myself, because there's so much loathing attached to it. So crossdresser became very quickly the more PC version of transvestite. Now, what I tell people now is that I am not a crossdresser. Cross-dressing is how I go from Chuck to Savannah, but it doesn't define why I do it. So I had to go down a path of self-discovery of like, well, what fits me? I'm transgender. Okay. Am I gender non-conforming? Yeah. But yet I conform to the biological gender when I present. I don't go out like this with a beard. You'll never see that. So I don't do amalgams of female or male presentation together. So I was like, well, I'm pretty conforming. Am I non-conforming? But I'm genderqueer, and sometimes I need to present, and those are people who wake up one day and say, I'm going to be female today, or I'm going to be male today. I am not that. I have a very regimented routine of, Sundays are the day for Savannah, and I'm happy with that. I don't need much more, except for here on a Wednesday with you.
Right.
So, there's so many terms, and like you said, it's an explosion of terms to further slice up what gender means, which is a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing in that more people can see a word and say, yes, that word describes me more accurately, and now I can understand myself better. But from an outlier or a person outside the community, and even inside the community, there's a lot of people struggling with keeping up with the terms and the words, and I don't know what this means. I've just got used to transgender. Now you're telling me there's non-conforming and genderqueer and agender. Then what does that got to do with sexuality, which is a completely different thing, which has nothing to do with our gender. Sexuality is a whole different plane of existence about agender or demisexual, asexual. All these things are in play, but they're all their own little stars in the galaxy. And for somebody who is not versed in it, it can be a hard push to get somebody to want to understand it.
Well, I gotta tell you, as you were explaining all of that, the thing that crossed my mind, you probably saw me crack a smile, because I was sitting there and I was thinking, for you to figure all this out for yourself, that had to be an exhausting process.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, to sit there and think to yourself, okay, so in 96 you decided to be, that you felt as though you were transgender, transvestite then, and then having to figure out what does that mean for me while all of these changes are happening. I just think about how sometimes when I'm thinking about my kids and my very white normal, like, you know what I mean? Like you
Your
couldn't be
heteronormative cis whiteness. Yes.
exactly. I recognize that of the hierarchy of people you feel like any sympathy for, I am the least sympathetic person. You know what I mean? Like, as far as who you, like, if I have problems, nobody really cares because I'm just like, yeah, but you have all the advantages. And I recognize that. I do. You know what I mean? Not to say my life was easy, but I mean, as far as my presentation to the world, you can't be any more like accepted than a tall, athletic white guy who is a lawyer. Like, you know what I mean? It can't get any more vanilla. And so, but hearing all of that and just thinking, man, in my life, sometimes it's exhausting to think about all the things I have to think about. I can't imagine trying to figure all that out, especially in a time like the 90s, because I remember the 90s where people were calling each other gay as a joke. You know what I mean? Like, it was and we weren't even thinking about gender fluidity. If we went in a time machine back to 96 and someone said I'm gender fluid, no one would have any idea what you're talking about.
No, there was not a language for that. But in 96, I was living in New York City, and I had gone to Lucky Chang's, which had opened in like 94, 93, 94, which was drag operated, drag run, drag staffed. Like, the entire place, and this was a place where celebrities in New York were going in because it was super hot to do in 96 to 95, and people were all going there because it was like the new thing. And that's where I first realized that people could appreciate somebody who is biologically male, as far as I understood, and be presenting as female and have a job and get tips and perform and be the hostess and be the bartender. And it was mind-blowing for me to come from the Midwest to go to there and see that, even though all I knew, like you said, in the 90s, you're gay or straight, or gay, lesbian, or straight. You are man or woman, gender. That's the only genders I understood. And then there was these people who were men, as far as I knew, but liked to dress as women. But did it for themselves, not for all the movies I had seen up to that point, where, I have to dress as a woman to get a job, to see my kids, Miss Doubtfire, have an apartment, bosom buddies. All those things were how I saw the world from somebody who dressed as a woman, but none of that ever spoke to me as like, that represents me. So you have the 90s with the infantile internet,
right?
And everything just being just so torrid and so stigmatized and fetishized. It's like, it was very difficult for me to say, hey, yeah, I'm one of those people.
Yeah, and you mentioned movies. Is there a movie out there that you feel that did speak to you on this?
Not
yet.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, there were a couple. I would say there was one that was the guy who was from Heroes, who was like the big brother. I can't remember his name, but he was in a movie called Just Like a Woman.
Okay.
And that movie actually tried to show cross-dressing in a serious light, as like, this is part of who I am, not like this big gag we're running. Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, was up there. Kinky Boots, Tu Wong Fu, was something I saw that they were doing it for them. It was performance, for a drag performance, but also that was how they lived their lives.
It's funny you bring up Kinky Boots, because my youngest daughter Lexi is big into theater, and she's doing plays. She's in a play right now, and she really loves it. So I bought season tickets to the Music Circus, which is out here. It's a theater in the round, and they do all sorts of things. And we had tickets to Kinky Boots, and I had never heard of it. I didn't know anything about it, and of course I'm sitting there, looking back. She's 11. I'm like, Kinky Boots should have probably prompted a Google search, but I was like, well, we're going to go see this play. And we sat down, and I was very surprised, but she loved it. And that actually prompted my Amber LeMay episode, because I want to expose my daughter to what a drag queen really is like. And so, going on that, can you tell me then what is different about you versus, say, a drag queen like Amber LeMay?
And she summarized it perfectly. I was on the edge of my seat waiting for her to explain what drag meant to her, which she said it was performative. Right. It was a way to express yourself and perform and be this bigger than life character, if you will. I can't sing. I can't dance. I do not do this for performance art or entertainment. This is strictly what I do to express myself. I like to be out in the world. Like I do have a need to be out in the world, seen and unseen. Sometimes the best way to blend in is to stand out, and the best way to stand out is to blend in. So, especially in South Carolina, where it's red and lots of guns, and flags.
I gotta imagine your experience out there would be very different than it is here in California.
Yeah, probably, but I know there's some red in California as well, depending on where you go. But for me, I've been met with nothing but kindness down here. We're in the upstate, so it's very progressive in a fairly red state, but it's fairly modern and moderate and liberal here in the Greenfield, Spartanburg area. But I've never met so many kind, loving people who just accept me for who I am, who would like to ask questions like you do. And I've never been more visible than I have been since I moved to South Carolina.
Wow, that's really great to hear. You wouldn't expect that.
No, I wouldn't. But what I would tell you that when I was in New York, I went out. But I would go to private events. I'd go to clubs. I'd go to places where you pay $20 and you're protected and you're in this bubble of people who are like you. And I really didn't feel a need to be as public and with the society, so to speak. But come down here, the bubble didn't exist. So I had to find a bigger community, which was the bigger LGBTQ plus community, P flag and meetup groups, and then realize, why don't I just go out? I can just go out. I can go to Starbucks and sit and work on my computer and do my own post-production on my own podcast and do my writing and sit there and just enjoy the day. And if somebody happens to look at me or wants to talk to me, that's all the better.
Wow, that's awesome. So now you mentioned you're married to a woman.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actual, real life, heteronormative, cisgender woman.
Wow.
Yes, all genetic woman. Yes, we've been together 7 years. No, that's not right. 9 years. She's known since day one. A lot of people will misconstrue and have misinformation about somebody who is a cross-dressing person, must be gay. That's absolutely false. From the surveys I've seen and heard, 85% of cross-dressing males are heterosexual. So, as soon as I tell somebody, three things come to mind immediately for people. If I say, hey, this is Savannah, this is me, I'm also this person, they would say, are you gay? Do you want to transition? And are you a drag queen? Those are the three big misconceptions about what a cross-dresser is.
Sure. So, your wife, and I don't want to get too personal about this, but how does she respond on Sundays when Savannah comes out? Is it the same as if you are, your male version is Chuck, right? Does she respond differently to affection and things of that nature when you're dressed as Savannah?
Oh yeah. The relationship is not the same. I would love it to be the same, of course, but there's barriers. That's not what she is looking for. She's not attracted to the feminine. So yeah, it is a different dynamic that we have. We even had a conversation that we'll have on my podcast soon, which is she still sometimes feels uncomfortable when she's sitting down on a couch and I come downstairs dressed and ready to go out. And sometimes that makes her uncomfortable, even though she's been with me for 9 years and it's got nothing to do with her worrying about me. Sometimes it takes her aback, regardless of how well I do it.
That's really interesting, even now after 9 years.
Yeah.
Wow. So how do you handle that?
A couples therapy, a lot of conversation, understanding expectations, setting boundaries, and then working with those boundaries and then revisiting those boundaries. We've had her on my podcast with my co-host several times, and she's like the voice of the significant other in a lot of ways where I'll never be able to tell her story and she can. It is a constant evolution. And just understanding where you are in any moment of that evolution and trying to just do the best you can.
So are there times, I'm guessing, where it's a Sunday and and she says, "Hey, listen, we're going, I don't know, at my parents' house or something like that. Can you be Chuck today for me?" I mean, do you have those types of situations that come up?
She knows that Sunday is for Savannah, so
Okay.
typically plans aren't made like
Uh
that.
huh. Uh huh.
But her family knows about Savannah completely.
Uh
All
huh.
her daughters, all their husbands,
Uh
they're
huh.
fully well aware of who I am. Um, Unfortunately, they all live out of state, so nobody's had the actual.
To meet Savannah.
They haven't met me yet, but yet the youngest daughter is always sending me cosmetics and
Mm-hmm.
like saying this is what this is for, and gives me a little, a gift bag of all the stuff she's not using. So everybody's appreciative and supportive of Savannah. But to your question,
Mm-hmm.
if she said, "Hey, can you show up in this way for me?" Of course, I would do that.
Yeah. Okay. A little bit of give and take there, then I would
Of
imagine.
course, you have to, because otherwise, it's all her coming to me and me not doing anything to
Yeah.
compromise back or betray.
Yes. So it sounds like then you guys are involved in this is her second marriage. Is this your second marriage as well, or
It would be, yes.
okay, all right? And you don't have to, if there's anything you don't want to
I had to
talk
think
about, you
about
can
it.
let me
Like,
know.
was I married? I was like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, I was married.
So was it the same with your first wife? Did your first wife also have aware, or did you? I guess the reason I ask is because I had a guy named Sonny Smith who transitioned from being male to female and then transitioned back to being male,
Mm.
and he talked about the difficulties. He actually ended up going through a divorce partially because of his transgenderism, and do you think that your status as a dual gender person had anything to do with your first marriage, kind of the demise, or is that just
Well, I mean, come on. It was the roaring 90s, the gay 90s, 1990s. In actuality, we were married for 5 years in the 90s. We had moved to New York together during that marriage. And I was discovering more, as I said earlier, about who Savannah is and what
mm,
what this new world was opening up to me about, like,
mm-hmm,
who am I and why am I?
mm-hmm,
And as a result, in the same way, she was discovering her own sexual identity. And
uh,
as a result, she discovered her sexual identity was not hetero. And
mm,
as a result, as I'm moving this way and she's moving this way, and we're evolving in different ways, we had to make the decision that we couldn't stay in this relationship and both flourish. So we
mm,
divorced. So it was
uh,
fairly amicable in that
mm,
way. To your point, did she know from day one about Savannah? No, but I was also very immature. I
mm,
was early in my 20s. I didn't really have a lot of confidence about sharing who I was with people. But as a result of that marriage, every relationship I had since, from the moment we become serious, like day one, they're being told.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting how how that happens. How as you get older, you realize what's most important. When you're in your 20s, it's just, is this person hot? you know, and
Well,
then, and,
I would, yeah, that too, but it was
uh,
also just being immature about who I was. Again, being in the 90s, let's call it 91, 92, where I didn't even actually come to terms with who I was. How can you
mm,
have a conversation with your partner, with your loved one, when you're not
mm.
even sure what to make of yourself?
That's a good point. I have to ask this because I know that there's probably listeners who are wondering this. Was there anything? And I asked, I think I asked Amber LeMay the same question. Was there anything in your childhood, any sort of abuse or anything that you think may have contributed to your dual gender status?
Oh, great question. The answer is, as far as I know, no. I
Okay.
will tell you, I was attracted to the feminine from the age of 5.
Mm,
So I don't think there was a lot of abuse happening before 5 that would lead
sure.
me in that route. What did happen, though, conversely, is that because of my family and the way my family is, they are very anti-queer.
Mm,
And
mm-hmm,
they were, this is Midwestern, conservative, traditional, lower middle class, working class family. And they had no compunction about speaking ill about gay people
mm,
or faggots or
mm,
whatever. That was just how they talked. But
yeah.
as a young person hearing these things being talked about to external things, you
Sure.
realize that, hey, you know what? Maybe I'm not going to share this with my parents, which
Right.
then led me into 15 years of really hiding myself away. So all the quote unquote abuse happened afterwards. It happened like just protecting myself in a way that I wouldn't lose her respect, I wouldn't lose her love, make sure I didn't make waves, make sure I kept this hidden away. And that actually caused me to compartmentalize differently. I have this risk assessment that I'm always on the lookout, like every situation, I'm always risk assessing. And it's something that is great, like in terms of business, in terms of talking to people, micro expressions, understanding body language, understanding intent, tone, all those things I learned as a result of hiding who I was and having to survive in this world. So no, I don't think there was nothing I can point to that said, "Oh yeah, because my dad did this," or because my dad loved my sister so much and I didn't get that love, therefore I want to emulate my sister. No, nothing like that was really in my purview.
Interesting. A couple questions I have out of this. One, what you just said. First, how's your relationship with your parents now? And then second, also, what do you think it was that was the catalyst for you kind of going away from hiding yourself and then kind of becoming this person who you seem excuse me, you seem so confident in who you are now. You know what I mean? That I'm sure took years and years to do, but what do you think was the big catalyst that kind of started you moving away from that?
I'm a pretty introspective person, whether learned or innate. So for me, once I hit my 20s and once I accepted the label for myself of transvestite in 1996, it was a constant assessment of like, am I gay? Because I would go to the drag club and be dressed as a woman. I'd see a man dressed as a woman and think they were pretty hot. So that must mean I'm gay because I'm attracted to them. And then I had to unravel like my sexuality as a result, which then I'm like, oh, wait, I wasn't gay a second ago. And now I'm gay all of a sudden. How did that happen?
Right.
And then that took me like 25 years to realize that your sexual attraction and your romantic attractions are completely different. Meaning like if you see a person across the room and you think they're hot, that's who you're sexually attracted to, which is for me, the feminine. Man, woman, transgender, post-op, doesn't matter. If they're presenting as a female and they're crushing it, they're attractive to me. If that's what I like and they're like embodying what I love about a woman, that's going to be attractive. But typically, my romantic attraction, the person I want to be in a relationship, is going to be very heteronormative. So in that way, it's like I want to be with a woman. Now, I could say I'm pansexual because if you brought a post-op trans person and I never knew they were ever a man and they're crushing it and we fell in love, am I going to like stop loving them because I found out they were a man? No. So in that way, it would kind of make me pansexual in some ways. So back to labels. But to your original point, what started me down the road was that moment of acceptance of myself. And I'm still working on it. I think a lot of it has to do with my writing because I typically write, and as I'm writing is fairly cathartic. And like you discover things just by letting things pulse out of your fingertips onto the page. So that's been helpful. I've done plenty of research for my books. That's been helpful. And I'm constantly listening to people's stories. I'm constantly reading people's stories and like understanding how that relates to me or does not relate to me. And then building a better base for myself.
Yeah.
And then to your other point, how do my parents feel about it? My parents never found out. I never told my parents. If you watch my first TEDx from North Carolina State, one of the last things I say is that, my parents may see this talk and they may want to find out that this is who I am and I'll deal with it if that happens, but they don't know. And my father's passed away just this year. And what I did is I wrote, we all the kids brought back ashes from the trip, and I wrote a letter to him and burned that letter once I read it out loud, and then scattered that with his ashes. So
Interesting. How many brothers and sisters do you have?
I have one older sister who does know, and one younger brother who's autistic who wouldn't understand it even if I explained it.
Okay, and is is he what do you call it, non-audible, nonverbal, or is he
Fairly. I mean, he
okay?
speaks, but he's not
Uh-huh.
gonna be able to carry a conversation or have his own place or be able to be
Mm,
self-sufficient in a way that's meaningful.
mm,
So yeah, but my sister knows, but we don't really talk about it. It's
mm.
just a known quantity between us.
Okay. Has she met Savannah?
She has not. She's seen pictures. She knows my
Okay.
advocacy, but no, she's never met. I have a cousin though who does
Mm,
also know, and she's
mm.
all about it.
Nice.
She loves that I'm Savannah and
Mm,
has that part, but also she's like
mm,
loves the community as well.
mm,
So sometimes it's all about like what you bring to the table is what you love.
mm.
Also helps sometimes knowing somebody like me.
So, identifying as dual gender, a question I'm sure that a lot of people ask is, why not just be identify as a man but also have feminine qualities? Does that make sense? What I'm asking?
Hmm.
Why the label dual gender as opposed to just being male and having feminine qualities? Like,
What makes you think that Chuck doesn't have feminine qualities?
well, that's what I'm saying though. What is the? I guess what I'm asking is what is the need that is fulfilled by you actually becoming Savannah for the times that you're there?
It is hard to describe and quantify. It is just, for instance, if I go too long without dressing, it can affect my mood. It affects my positivity. It actually has a mental effect on me by not being able to, which is why having a schedule is so important to me. To like, even if I miss it, I know that
Mm-hmm.
was my day, and I choose whether to embody my femininity or not. It is not
Mm-hmm.
as simple as either being a girl who's a tomboy or being a man who's a little effeminate and likes to cook or cries at the
Sure.
movies. It's not as cut and dry as that. It's not the stereotypical male or female behaviors that we've
Mm-hmm.
assigned to men and women, because I
Mm-hmm.
think that's bullshit too. It's like
Mm-hmm.
you're asking, why can't you just be more feminine as a man? It's like I think every person on this planet has a level of femininity and masculinity to them, to their
Oh,
personality, even
sure.
if it doesn't show up on a blood test or in your
Mm-hmm.
chromosomes. It's like there is nobody who's like alpha male
Mm-hmm.
100% without
Mm-hmm.
having some quieter, subtler, softer side to them. It's almost nearly impossible to be completely 100% male. And if you were, what would that look like? What would
Yeah.
define the 100% male who has no feminine qualities?
I think it'd be like a construction worker that's eating his lunch on top of like one of those suspended steel bars and just sitting there catcalling women. I mean, come on,
Well,
right?
that could be, but I'll do you one better because I know people who used to do high rise construction. A lot of them were
Uh-huh.
Indians.
Ah,
Native American Indians
sure.
they were flocking to jobs like that because they wanted to be closer to God and closer to nature and be in the air, and that's very spiritual. And
That's
you wouldn't
interesting.
say that necessarily like that sounds like a masculine quality, this
Sure.
spiritual nature about how they see life.
Sure.
So yeah, it is a trap. It is a
Yeah.
trap to say, well, why can't you just be male or female? Because we all have male and female in us, and that's regardless of how
Yeah.
we show up in the world biologically. But for me, like going back to the point, it is hard to quantify, but it is important for me to be. And I've
Mm-hmm.
come to accept that Savannah is an integral part of my life. The conversation you and I are having, other than me being a little more, this with my hands,
Mm-hmm.
and being looking this pretty, you would get the same person. You
Right.
would have the same conversation with Chuck, maybe
Yeah.
about something completely different, but you still have the same intelligence, the same empathy. That's the femininity I'm bringing to the world as my male self.
Well, and that's what's so interesting is that you seem to me, just in talking to you. I mean, people have different kind of vibes. You know what I mean? And you just have a very positive, happy vibe, and it seems like that. I got to think that like there's this discussion I've seen in psychology and stuff, particularly with transgenderism. There's a question or the controversy, quote unquote, on whether or not, in fact, I mean, I may screw this up, but like, there's a disproportionate amount of transgender people who suffer from depression, and that the idea would be, well, allowing them to transition and changing the culture would help that. And then some studies have suggested that maybe that isn't the case, that that the people who do transition don't have better outcomes. But I'm looking at you, and it seems like this is a better outcome for you. I mean, is that what you've noticed, that your overall well-being and mental health is better because you can do this?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree with that. For me, this is a perfect hybrid. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, for somebody like me, it's kind of what's the word I'm looking for? A cheat. Because
Mm-hmm.
if it got a little too dicey in South Carolina, here in Savannah, I could always put her away and be my heteronormative male white self, and nobody to have anything to say or know about it.
Right.
Whereas somebody who is transitioning or needs to express their life 24/7 in a body not made for them,
Mm-hmm.
yes, they suffered from probably depression prior to making the decision of understanding what they needed as a person to
Mm-hmm.
thrive. But the problem in so many of those cases is that doing this surgery is not magically going to make you happy,
Mm-hmm.
because now you've gone from being a male who wants to be female, let's say in this example,
Mm-hmm.
and you're struggling with yourself, you're struggling with your self-esteem, you're depressed, you got suicidal ideation, all these things that are like because you just don't see yourself in the body you are biologically born up into. So you go the other way, you have the surgeries, top, bottom, whatever you think fits for you. Go on hormones, you get cosmetic surgery, and then all of a sudden you're not happy there because you're now physically and societally ostracized for
Mm-hmm.
being this outlier.
Mm-hmm.
So you've gone from not being happy in your own body to happy in your own body, but you've gone from being socially accepted to socially ostracized.
Yeah, and that's a thing that's so interesting about this. And maybe this is just a me thing, because I just did a podcast where I answered a question. It was a religious question for a listener, and I had a couple of friends on there, and we were talking about this. And I go, everybody obviously wants to be liked, and everybody obviously wants to be part of the group and be in. I mean, I think everybody wants to be viewed in a positive light, but in the end, I don't care what people think a lot. You know what I mean? Like when it comes to, like, for example, I do pro wrestling, and some people just don't understand that at all, and they don't get it, and some people make fun of it. But I don't care. I like it. You know what I mean? And now that is nothing like someone who's transgender. I'm not trying to say they're the same thing. But why care so much about what everybody else thinks if it makes you happy? You know what I mean? It's more rhetorical.
Because the human condition was not designed for happiness. We
That's actually very profound.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I didn't really think about it, and I must be an outlier because, as you said before, I am very content. I'm very positive. My
Mm-hmm.
girlfriend hates how positive I am sometimes. Why can't I just be like, fuck the world kind of person? I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
that's just not how I see the world. It's
Right.
just not me. But if you look at, especially in Western culture, Maslow's pyramid, where
Mm-hmm.
we define our social structure, like we want shelter, we want
Mm-hmm.
sustenance, we want community, and then
Mm-hmm.
slowly we get to the pinnacle of all our needs being met, and
Mm-hmm.
like self-fulfillment, like yay, I did a good job, and then all of a sudden you can go beyond that and be like, I want to self-actually, I want to
Uh-huh.
do something beyond myself that's not just required but for me.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine trying to do that when you have no bearings, you have no community, you have no love and support from family and friends, and you're trying to self-actually outside of that,
Mm-hmm.
all by yourself. It's
Right.
hard to do. So the human condition is meant for survival, not for
Mm-hmm.
happiness. So
Mm-hmm.
happiness is not typically our normal state, but I found for me that, like you said, when you stop caring, when you stop giving as many F's as you used to,
Mm-hmm.
you start seeing like what makes you happy. It's like, I'm
Yeah.
not here to make your life fulfilled, other than your family, obviously the people are close to you,
Sure.
in doing that for them as a gift in gratitude. But when you're doing it for yourself and you're so busy making everybody else happy and not making waves and compromising yourself versus making a compromise, that's when you find that like you're not fulfilled.
Yeah. That's actually true. I tend to have a tendency, and I've worked through this, where I derive happiness by making everybody around me happy, like my kids. I love Christmas because I love getting them gifts and watching them get so excited and all these things. But the problem with that is it's just a fool's errand to make everybody happy all the time. If you're only going to be happy by making everybody else happy, there's always going to be somebody unhappy about something, and you're just not going to get that. And so it's kind of a push pull. And I think that sometimes I've thought about this a lot. I went on a mission for my church, and there used to always be a thing they give us, which I think is a good concept, which says I am third, meaning God, everybody else, and then you. Like you're serving other people. And I kind of took that with me. I was 19 to 21, very impressionable, and I took that and I applied it into my life. But when you're doing that all the time, but nobody's getting you, you just kind of, at some point, you're like, when's my happiness start? You know what I mean?
It's like when you have those 10 people who are all giving each other back rubs.
Yeah.
Or like shoulder rubs, but you're the one in the back and nobody's giving you a back rub.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Hey, when's it my turn? I thought this would come full circle,
Yeah.
It's very true. I've lived a long time making my partners happy above my own happiness, making sure that their needs were met. And just like general emotional needs, like, let me not be me because being me causes you grief. So let me stop being me. And that's a fine line. It's one thing to say, I got friends who know I wrestle and they think it's stupid. And they're like, I don't understand why you do that. It's like, well, I mean, that's just their own opinion about what they think of wrestling. Because I love wrestling. Don't get me wrong.
Great. Awesome.
Saturday Night Main Event, when it took over from Saturday Night Live, I was all about it. But when you stop being, that was just their opinion about you, right?
Yeah.
If you stop being you, like wholly stop being who you are as a person to satisfy somebody else's opinion about how they see you, because seeing you for the person you are makes them unhappy. That is a very bad dynamic to have to try to wade through. And I'm kind of done doing that. I mean, again, you asked me before about, my spouse, and we push pull, we give, we take, we compromise, we boundary, we go through therapy, we try to be better, but we're all trying to be better. We're all in the same path moving forward versus me sitting a side eye and like worrying that like, oh, she doesn't like what I'm doing, therefore I should stop doing what I'm doing so she'll be happy.
That makes sense. I think one of the things that makes people, well, there's a couple of things that I think that makes this cultural change that's going on so interesting. It's been so fast. I mean, the LGBTQ community has done what I think the Black community has wanted to do for 60 or 70 years in 15. I mean, it was 2008 when California, one of the most liberal states in the union, overwhelmingly passed Prop 8. And both Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, the Democratic primary candidates, both endorsed traditional marriage. And then from there, we've gone from basically, I would say, general acceptance of same-gender marriage to now transgenderism is a talking point. And so and so are all of these other things, pronouns, bathrooms, like all of these things have changed in such a quick time. And it's made, I think, people who tend to be very conservative, particularly, and even people who aren't. I mean, people who I think would say they're Democrats and things, really uncomfortable with the speed, and not to say that's a bad thing. I'm just saying. I mean, I can understand that if you want equal rights, you don't want them slowly. You know what I mean? So, but here's the thing that I know a lot of people are going to ask, and I want to ask you this. So why not? It seems as though if somebody wants to have this conversation, often they are heralded. There's a lot of name calling that gets thrown out, right? What do you say? And the reason I ask this is because I think that there's a lot of people who would love. You seem like a very open person and somebody I would totally be comfortable asking questions to. But I know there's a lot of people out there who are afraid for fear of being, I don't know, canceled or labeled homophobic or transphobic or all of these things. Why do you think that is? Why is it that it seems as though that sometimes if you voice the least bit of resistance to acceptance of all of these things, you kind of get shouted down. Do you know?
Yeah, that is it. I mean, wokeness and cancel culture are rampant right now. Wokeness was originally a black African American term used to basically talk about equality and talk about how we all should be on the same level field. And equality for all. That's what wokeness is. It's just understanding that everybody should have the same rights, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, now woke has become a campaign slur of like, I'm DeSantis, I'm the anti-woke state.
Yeah.
It's like,
Right.
and like it's just it's weaponizing the words, either left and right. Don't get me wrong; it's not purely a right thing. It's left and right. It's the extreme left and right, or weaponizing words, weaponizing situations that put so much fear and fear mongering back into the societal norm. And so, if you're talking about like the speed in which things are progressing, is counterposed by the speed of the hundreds of bills in committee and being passed into law at the state level to ban bathroom use if it's not your biology. Or now I hear, and again, I didn't read the article too deep, but like they even in Florida, educators can't use the bathroom that they identify with, and they can't use pronouns in the classroom. And all these things are about shackling. It's not about freedom anymore. It's not about freedom of expression. It's about shackling this minority or this group of people. And I think it's all because of the speed. It's become very, very important for the ultra conservatives, and I'm going to dare say the Christian nationalists, without getting too political, because there's a foothold issue happening in this country where they said that within the next 20 years, as Gen Y stops going to organized churches, that you're going to see kind of a collapse of organized religion in many ways in this country. And also in the same census point, they said we probably should wait for the 2030 census, but that the average white American will no longer be the majority of the ethnicity in this country. So there's a lot of fear about losing power bases, about change, because as humans we hate change.
We do.
I mean, I don't even like to go to school, go to work on Monday because that's change from the weekend.
Yeah, but that's the thing, right? That's the thing is that this change is happening so rapidly, and that's the that I think is the thing that so many people struggle with, is that it's happening so quickly. It seems like there's a new term coming out every little while that you I mean, like you said earlier, you're like, I just got used to transgender, and now there's pansexual, and now there's this and there's that, and you just sit there and you're like, how do you handle all of it? And I think this is something my views have definitely evolved over the last 15, 20 years on this, as everybody's has. But keeping up can be really a struggle. I mean, you as somebody, as a member of the community, have been constantly evolving who you are, and we all have to evolve as well. And I think that could be a good thing.
Well, here's the thing: the way you think and the way I think is not the typical. Meaning, you're talking about like, I know there's words out there that I probably should look into and know what it means, because you're interested. That's the entire premise of your show.
Right.
I'm interested in asking those questions that I think other people may not ask or want to ask or care to ask. Now, the problem is so many people in this country and around the world have no interest in asking. And as a result, they get mired in ignorance for the level of worldview that they're comfortable with. Now, when I say ignorance, I'm not talking about stupidity. I'm talking about, if you don't need to learn something outside of what's in your worldview and in your perception, then you're never going to want to learn those terms because it's outside of you until all of a sudden you find out what my nephew is gay, or oh my god, my niece is transgender. All of a sudden, and you love that child as a sympathetic and empathetic human being, you might actually say, oh my god, I need to learn about this all of a sudden, and then your worldview will change based on the direct exposure you have to it. The problem is I deal with ignorance on a daily basis.
I'm sure.
But yet, as I said earlier, I've been met by lovely people here in South Carolina. I've been met by people who want to ask me questions, who want to get to know me, even if they think I'm a novelty. I can always feel good about their takeaway that they met somebody like me, had a real conversation, and whether or not they changed their mind about me is not the point. The point is that they made a human connection, and they can go from that and say, hey, Marge, I met this trans person over at Starbucks today. And it'll just open up a conversation that they met somebody, and it wasn't this dire consequence encounter where, I was, raping the children and grooming this and story houring that. I mean, it's just like, I'm just a human being like everybody else. And I think people get so much fear about what they don't know and don't care to really know outside the comfort of their living. And that's where shows like this come into play, where they can listen and say, oh, well, I didn't know that. It's like, I may not agree with it, but I now know something different I didn't know before.
Right. Well, and I think, I think that is exactly kind of my point in talking about the shouting down, because I thought about this a while back, because let's say that there is a question that's given and it's rooted in transphobia. It truly is, because people are afraid of what they don't know, right? Well, let's use a different phobia, like agoraphobia. The fear of I think that's the fear of the sun, right? Agoraphobia, or fear of, I don't know exactly what it is.
Fear of going outside your house or something.
Yeah, going outside because of the sun or something like that. So, well, if someone's agoraphobic, the way to fix that is not to shout them down and make them feel stupid for being agoraphobic. It's exposing them and talking with them and exposing them to the things they're afraid of, and eventually that fear, in theory, not always, but it can go away. And I think that a lot of if there are people who truly are transphobic or homophobic, exposure to those people to realize that they're just and that's part of why I wanted to have you on, is so that people could come and see you're a regular person. You just happen to have, a different lifestyle, and that's okay, And now here's a question I did want to ask you about this. I know that a lot of my conservative friends would probably ask this question if they had the shot. And that is there a line where, like, is there kind of a line where you go, okay, this is enough? You know what I mean? Like, because, like, let me give you an example why. There's some sort of extremes out there that people compare transgenderism to. For example, like, you've heard of the furry people, right? The people who, like, identify as cats. Or I don't know what you call them, but I know there's a group of people out there who really feel as though they should have been an amputee. And so...
Yep, I've heard of that too.
So... And I think that most people would still say there's a line there where we're not going to accept some of that, right? But I guess what my question was is there a line when it comes to gender where you go, okay, or even sexuality or anything, where you go, hey, like, societally, we're not going to accept that?
Oh, you've opened up Pandora's box. Okay, let me see if I can answer all the questions.
Yeah.
First of all, nobody should be telling you how to love, who to love.
Mm-hmm.
Just simple as that. I mean, I don't think that needs any more explanations. Like, I don't care what the Bible says. I don't care what any parchment says. I don't know what any laws have been on books since 1820 say. It's like, I have every right to love the person I want to love. There should be no restriction to that, which is why gay marriage finally became a thing, which they're trying to battle that now to, like, get that, like, outlawed again. People should be able to love who they want to love. You're not hurting anybody. You're not hurting each other. Why is it your business to basically felonize me for loving somebody from my heart? So that's all I'm going to say about that.
Yeah. Well, let me before you go on to the next thing, let me kind of ask you about that, because the reason, this is my lawyer brain that pops up, right?
Okay.
Because I sit there and I think, okay, but societally though, we have put limits on who you can love, right? Like, for example, there's statutory rape laws, right? Where, like, and I think they've changed a little bit now, where, like, there's these Romeo and Juliet things where, it depends on the amount of age difference. But for an example, like a 20-year-old guy and a 16-year-old girl, they can't have a sexual relationship in some states, because they've determined that there's a line. And it seems to me that a lot of the arguments or the things that people are pushing back on is that there are some people who have a very conservative line on this, and some people have a very progressive line on this. But my question is there a line where we go, okay, that is never, like, I think everybody would agree that even if somebody said, well, pedophilia is a sexual whatever, everyone says that's not okay, right? And for good reason. But I mean, so I don't think anyone's going to say that that's comparative at all. But is there a line before that where we're like
the line before the line?
Yeah, is there? I'm just trying to see, like.
Well, first, let me answer real quick. First of all, every state's got different laws, right?
Yeah,
that's
true.
one problem. So whoever was in power when a law was passed defined the age, defined the disparity between the ages. Like, if it's a 16 and a 17-year-old, well, I mean, in reality it's statutory, but they're both minors, so then that doesn't mean as much as if it was a 25-year-old and a 15-year-old. When I'm talking about loving who you love, I was not talking about, like, non-consensual age.
Oh, that's
a dicey line to, like, start layering into.
And I want to make it clear, I was never suggesting that.
Yeah. But you're right. The line is blurry because the line has no baseline of consensus. Yeah. Even in this country, if you went to every state of the union and you looked up the statutory rape laws and what's consenting adult means, none of them going to be the same. Just like every state who's doing anti-abortion laws or rolling them back out, it was like, well, it's 6 weeks or it's 26 weeks or it's as soon as you conceive it, now you can't have an abortion because you put a seed in some woman and her egg is implanted. I mean, there's no guide fast. A lot of it is religion based because there's laws that say you can't do one thing, but yet you can marry somebody when they're 14. I mean, there's such a topsy-turvy, like, whatever crazy rule sets people want to do in that moment, like, is so counter to what a lot of the other things that have already been written in law mean. Sure. So, you as a lawyer probably could chew on that for months.
Oh, I could.
And me, dude, I'm glad I'm 52. That's
yeah. But that's what I'm saying is that philosophically, because we are, look, what the LGBTQ community is really asking us to do is completely change a part of culture that has kind of been accepted for thousands of years in different forms.
Thousands of years?
Well, I think so. I mean, I think what I mean by let's say Western civilization has kind of accepted the what do you call it? Like, there's men and women for a while, right?
Interesting. Because Roman Empire, men and men were really the norm for sexuality, and women were just there to procreate. So,
really,
thousands. Oh yeah, it's like, look back to Greek and Roman times, the birthplace of democracy and philosophy. You look at those as like men. The idea of men and women and men and men and men and boys was completely different than what it is now. So even within thousands of years, rules have changed. I mean, our forefathers were wearing powdered wigs, frilly tops, satin jackets, and high-heeled shoes. I'm somehow the person that's a problem here in the modern era.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. No, but no, thinking about that though, that's something I have heard. I have not done a lot of research on it, so I'm not saying this is I believe this, but I've heard the argument. Yeah, like the Romans and things like that. There's been an argument that says, yeah, but that tends to be what happens at the end of civilization, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, no, really, like the Roman Empire kind of falls. I don't know if that's true. I've just heard it.
Well, you heard it here first. I am the end of civilization.
Well, here's the thing that I think is so interesting is I think that progress is important, and I think it's really there's this push-pull for me because I am religious, right? And I sit there and I think to myself, I go, why do I? There's a lot of this. I do a lot of philosophy. I'm like, why? But why is it only women that wear dresses? That's just like a social thing, right? I mean, who came up with that idea? And why do I have to? I've asked this all the time. Why do I have to wear a suit?
Yes.
To court. I hate it. You know what I mean?
Why can't
like
you wear a graphic tee with a blazer, like Steve Jobs up in there?
I'm telling you what. At the very least, if I know I'm retiring, my last court appearance, I'm gonna be wearing Angus Young schoolboy, shorts, because I don't know, but no, I think this is an interesting conversation to have because is there a place where it is okay for people to say we're not okay with that? Okay, and I don't know where it is.
Here's what I'm going to say. Because we're talking about those lines, and we're talking about when is enough enough. The problem in today, as I mentioned, with I think over 600 bills in committee being put into law in a lot of red states and even some blue states, what is it's doing? It's not a protection of freedoms. It's actually banning minorities from doing something. Now,
and I don't think that's okay. And I don't think that's okay. I think that's the problem.
The problem is I don't think anybody who's just midstream, middle of the road, moderate person like myself, I don't want anything more than everybody else has.
Mm-hmm.
Civil unions, fantastic. We should have that. If you want to call it marriage, awesome. I'm married to a girl, so it really doesn't affect me. Healthcare, proper healthcare. The government should not be telling me you can't do this, even though 15 doctors said it's the best course of action. There should not be barriers to that. There should not be barriers to living my life as a human being. We should have equality for all. Everybody should have the same rights. The problem is a lot of these anti-bills are anti. They're like, we need to keep you down into where you are because we're afraid you're going to rise up.
So that's actually something that I don't, as somebody who I would say if I was going to put myself on the political spectrum, I would say I'm probably moderately conservative. But the conservative part of me is limited government. And I don't understand, if you are a conservative, why you would support some of these bills that are limiting freedoms for people. Yes. And here's what I would also tell you there's just as there is a caricature view of people of the LGBTQ community, I also think there is a very much a caricature view of some of the religious people, at least the ones I know, because I don't think there's anyone out there who is actively or at least feels as though they really do not like the LGBTQ community.
Right. If you do a poll right now of the average American, whether about abortion, about queer people, about whatever, most people are not in alignment with the trend of laws trying to be passed.
Yeah, right. And that's the thing, is that I don't think that they are concerned necessarily about what adult humans are doing. At least the ones I know, they're always like, you know what, if that's what they need to do to make themselves happy, and they feel transitioning is better, or doing the dual gender is better for them, they're all for it. I think where they get concerned is here in California, where it's kind of starting to trickle down into the kids. And the question becomes, and this is a question I don't really know the answer to, again, putting my lawyer brain on. So if you have a 14-year-old, I have a 14 and a 12-year-old daughters, right? And if one of them, I don't know what I would do, candidly, if one of them came to me and said, Dad, I think I feel as though I'm a man, and I want to go on, what do you call? I don't know what you call them. I can't remember what you call them, but the medication. Yeah, the puberty blockers, right? So I really don't know how I would handle that. I would like to think that I would like to think that I would go, okay, let's go talk to your doctor about this, and let's go talk to a therapist about
Therapist,
this,
yeah.
and let's go, I want to be a part of the conversation and be comfortable with it too. The
As well
concern,
as a child being comfortable, not
right,
just reactive.
right.
Again, and this goes back to the point of like, let's say you did all that. Let's say
Hmm.
your child came to you and said, I feel like I'm in the wrong body. You went to 3 doctors, 4 therapists. Everybody's in alignment with agreement with a course of action. And then all of a sudden the government says, oh, I'm sorry, you can't do that in this state because it's illegal.
No, and I understand what you're saying there, especially if a 14-year-old can go get a nose job. I don't, you know what I mean? I don't understand, but I think my point is, and what the concern is I know that there are some places, like I've heard of places where a child can. I don't think this is not in California, but a child can go and transition without a parent knowing. And I just, for me, again, my lawyer brain, I sit there and I think to myself, okay, so like I can't represent, a if a child gets in a car accident as a personal injury attorney, I have to have their parent come in and sign the contract, because we don't feel like that. And also, again, my 14-year-old can't engage in a sexual relationship with the 20-year-old. Why? Because we call it statutory rape, because we don't believe that they can form the requisite consent to actually have a sexual relationship with someone who's in their 20s. But we feel like they can consent to changing their gender without parental consent. That's where I think the concern is.
Yeah, but is
So
that truth? Is that can a child do that right now in any of the
so
states?
so I don't know about any of the states. I know in California they cannot.
Okay.
But that's the concern. And that's why I think I wanted to ask you about the where's the line, because the arguments are always, and I hate them, but they're always the slippery slope arguments. The problem is that a lot of the time with these arguments, the slippery slope sounds a little valid because, like, let's go back to Prop 8. In Prop 8 in 2008, the argument that was there was that if we do this, then they're going to start teaching your kids that all this stuff is okay and all these things. And then everyone was like, that's just fear mongering. That's not going to happen. Well, now it's 15 years later and it has. You know what I mean? And so then it gives fodder to these arguments that I think are completely invalid, where they're like, oh, well, then I guess, people can just identify as sheep, and nobody's doing that. You know what I mean? Well, the slippery slope. So I think that's where the concern is. I know you're just talking for yourself. You don't claim for the community, but how do you feel about that? Like the idea of kids transitioning, because how old were you in '96?
25.
Okay, so you're a little bit older. The reason I bring this up is because I've had a few people on who they felt they were transgendered way early in their teens, and it's like, how do you handle?
Yeah, but I knew when I was 5.
Right,
But it
right,
wasn't about transitioning. It was about this attraction to something. So there
yeah,
was a lot of experimentation. None of it was. I mean, I wasn't speaking to my parents about it because I worried for my safety and or my, being loved. So
yeah,
there's several layers to this. The first layer is, should a child of underage, whether 16 is a cutoff or 14 or whatever, should they be doing gender reassignment without parental consent? I'd say no,
yeah.
because I
That's
feel there
interesting.
is the problem. There's 2 problems. One, what if your parents are completely anti-queer and
Mm.
now they throw you in conversion therapy, or
Oh,
they
that's a
try
good
to
point.
stop your path of your truth
Hmm.
because they're afraid of what it might lead to, the slippery slope.
Yeah.
Now, conversely, if your parents are loving and supportive and they do what we had talked about, where it's like, all right, we're going to go see 2 doctors and get opinions. We're going to talk to, um, a couple of therapists and sit down for a year or more and suss out like if this is truth for you or if this is just you heard it on the news, therefore you were open to it.
Hmm.
Same problem with drag queen story hour. Just because kids are exposed to a drag queen telling a story, all of a sudden it ends up being oh my God, they're infecting my kids, or I'm going to want to be gay and trans, which is not the truth. The problem, you talk about a slippery slope. The problem is all the slippery slopes are all based in fear.
Yeah, it's true.
And the problem is if we have a real conversation about what is the practicality of a child of age X who is going through something, what is the process? The process should be like, even when I was coming up in the 90s, early 90s, early 2000s, it was you have to live, like to transition, you'd have to live in the opposite sex or the opposite gender for a year, like full time, 24/7 for a year, go to therapy before anybody would ever sign off on surgery.
Yeah,
Now,
I
that was
remember
what
that.
it was 25, 30 years ago, which I was very much like, I probably would have needed that if I was so pink fogged about, like, I want tits and I want to get rid of my penis and I want to do this and that and the other thing and live this full time. And then, like you said, your one friend who did detransition
Yeah.
because that wasn't the answer. So, really, for me, it's about the thoughtfulness and the empathy for both the child or the person, in this case, whether adult or child, and just have a very, not regimented, but a very specific set of things that should be done in order for surgery to be performed. And I'm going to just ask one more thing because I don't know the answer, but I have not been able to do a Google search to find out how many kids have been, mangled and mutilated at the age of 12. You show me cases, you show me when that's happened, because I've never come across as being an actual thing.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Is that I don't think it is these worries, right? You're very much right. These are anxieties about things that haven't happened yet. But because of the speed of how this is going, I think people are more worried about it. I can only say here for people I've talked to here in California is that people are very concerned about, you know, kids. And I think that you're right. I don't, like I said, I don't know how I would handle it. I'd like to think I would handle it in a compassionate way. And I'm just being completely honest with myself. Uh, I think I would. I think I would. I don't know, and I can't imagine what that's gotta be like. By the way, you mentioned you were in the '90s. What crossed my mind? You might appreciate this. I just took my son to see the Smashing Pumpkins on Monday, and I love that. My son, he's is a completely off topic, but I love that my son is a good guitar player and a singer. He does choir, and and he does all these other things, and musically, and it was just so cool to go and see a band from my generation, and him really enjoy it, have songs that he wants to hear him play, and be mad that they didn't play a certain song that he was waiting for. He's really into that. Green Day, we went and saw Green Day together. He's them and Guns N' Roses and all these different bands, and it's so cool. And part of the thing that's cool about him and being in choir is does get exposed to a lot of people who are gay and transgender and things just in the choir community and things of that nature. And I think that's really good, for him. Again, like my kids are growing up in a way that they didn't have phobias that I probably did have when I was, 16.
Yeah.
And so I think
Same
that
here.
that's a good thing. Now, another thing I wanted to talk a little bit more about things you like. You are big into the MCU.
I am. Marvel Cinematic Universe, for anybody who doesn't.
So, do you have a favorite one? What's your favorite movie?
Man, it's hard because I knew going in when I saw Iron Man, the first Iron Man, when
Oh,
Samuel L. Jackson shows up at the end, I was losing my mind. The fact that Iron Man was so well done and Robert Downey Jr. was like
so
the
well done.
epitome of Tony Stark was mind blowing. And then things like Guardians of the Galaxy before it came out, Volume 1, where
Oh yeah,
people were like, that's going to be stupid. It's got a tree and a rodent. And I'm like,
yeah.
oh my God, did you not read the Annihilation crossover series from Marvel when it came out? This is going to be epic. And I knew it was going to be epic. And people were like, I never heard of these people, so it's going to be stupid. But yet, Iron Man was a very low tier character for Marvel beyond Spider Man, Fantastic Four, the Avengers as a whole. So I think that, like, up to what are we in phase 5 now? Phase 4?
Yeah, I don't know. I just know there's been a ton of them.
There's some of them. I mean, even Moon Knight was a favorite character for me. I was big in the David Finch run. So I thought that the presentation of the multiple personalities was done so well on the Disney Plus show. Hey, are they all fantastic and epic? No, but I love every one because it doesn't try to be something more than it is.
Yeah.
And even if your expectation, like we talked off air, that after Endgame, that Infinity War Endgame combo was such the crowning jewel of the MCU, it's hard to like start from scratch again, knowing that happened, and then being like, okay, now we're going to rebuild to another crescendo. It's hard to sit there and be, well, nothing's as good as Endgame,
Yeah.
But
you know what's funny about that is, I told my son, he's really into all the comics and he knows all the stuff. I never read the comics. In fact, you bring up Guardians of the Galaxy, I was that guy. I'm like, it's a raccoon in a tree. That's going to be stupid. And it ended up being my favorite one. In fact, in the MCU movies, I think the ones that I have gone in with zero expectations tend to be the ones I love the most. And I Guardians of the Galaxy, Ant-Man, Iron Man were the three. Like, I had big expectations for Captain America and Thor, and it fell a little flat for me because of because they were so high, right? Like my expectations were so high. When they finally did the Avengers, it was awesome, but the first movies. But I think the Endgame, what I thought was so interesting, and I told my son, was, I go, it's very rare when you are watching a movie and you are realizing you are watching the pinnacle of like a cinematic moment. Like, the only other one that in my lifetime that I could think of is when I saw Jurassic Park for the first time, and I realized, I was like, movies have been changed forever now.
Star Wars,
exactly.
I saw Star Wars when I was 5 years old.
Right.
That movie. I mean, we were in the front row. Our neighbor took me and my sister. We got there late, which I hate, and we were in the physical front row, staring up at the screen, like right above us at this weird angle. But it was one of those things, one of moments in cinematic history where you're never going to see sci-fi the same way again. It was so epic and just so well told, even though it's a very simplistic story telling narrative. It was just like perfect. And so, you have these moments. So like you said, Endgame was that pinnacle of like everything coming together when Captain America was worthy of carrying Thor's hammer and saying Avengers Assemble. I didn't need anything else because my life was complete.
Nice. That's the thing, is that I mean, I never to think about what they did there, where they perfectly executed 19 movies to culminate in one giant movie. And I remember, I was just like, it's changed everything. Now everybody's got a cinematic universe, even Godzilla and King Kong, and you know what I mean. Like they've made these franchises into huge cinematic universes that all fit together. It changed everything. Just like you said, Jurassic Park. I was 12 years old when my dad took me to Jurassic Park, and that was the first time they did THX surround sound, and you saw CGI that looked real. Yeah. Like dinosaurs looked real. And I remember thinking, I was like, this has changed everything. And that's the way this has been. The MCU is so great. But ever since Endgame, it feels like there's been a bit of a step down. And I don't know if it's truly that the movies have gotten worse, or we're just starting to feel some fatigue from all of them.
Or you're just your expectation. You're still riding the Endgame high.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Loki was fantastic for me on Disney Plus. I loved Moon Knight, so I even loved this special presentation of Werewolf by Night. It's like, if everybody brings just their own spin, their own take in a way that's honest and truthful to like what the material is. For me, I don't think any film's bad. You might like it more than others, but they're all, to me, quality. Even if the CG was rushed, blah blah blah, Disney, make people work 50 hours a day. I can't answer to that, but I can answer that. For me, other than I'm watching the Saw series from #1 right now.
Oh, really?
As part of my other podcast, and because Saw X is coming out this year, so I'm watching them like beginning to end. I love it. I love movies in general. I used to do movie reviews. I used to live in New York City and go into the city to the premieres and sneak peeks. I'm a huge cinephile. I love movies just because. So you, like you said before, my positive attitude, I pretty much can see something good in everything.
Yeah, that's the thing. Why some of my friends get mad at me because I very rarely find a movie to be terrible. And most of the times when they're terrible like in a good way.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. And
it was so bad it was good.
Yeah. In fact, you mentioned, so you're a big horror fan. I have to ask you, have you seen Velocipaster?
I heard about it,
Oh,
and I saw a scene of it because somebody brought it up to me like 6 months ago. I'm like, I gotta write that down. I don't even know what that is.
Oh,
I saw the scene and I thought it was insane.
Savannah, you have got to see it. I think it's on Amazon. That's where I saw it. And it was funny because I was alone one night and I was looking through Amazon Prime and I saw Velocipaster I said Velocipaster and it said a pastor who turns into a dinosaur and fights crime. And I said, clearly I have to watch this.
Clearly.
And I got to tell you, it does not disappoint. In fact, I have been trying since the inception of this podcast to get the director of Velocipaster on, and he has eluded me. I have gotten Sean Kanan from Cobra Kai. I have gotten Sean Weiss from A Goal of Mighty Ducks. I've had Stephen Chiodo on, who did Killer Clowns from Outer Space. And I can't get the director from Velocipaster. I was like, come on, man.
Maybe he's too busy on the script for part 2.
He is. He's doing a part 2. And that's why I wanted him on. I want to talk about it. And I want to be like, you, sir, are a genius for putting this together. And so tell me, horror films, what are your favorites?
Depends on the subgenre of horror, but Exorcist is always going to be tops.
Have you seen that there's a new Exorcist coming out?
There's a new one series coming out or new movie coming out, a new beginning? I haven't seen it yet.
I think it's connected.
I believe it is. I believe the mother is the same. I'll pay more attention to it when it gets closer. The A24 films are fantastic.
I've never heard of those. A24?
That's the it's like Blumhouse.
Okay.
It's like they do a series of films like Pearl, X. Then you got Jordan Peele movies, which are fantastic. But if you want to talk about favorites, it's going to be kind of edge toward sci-fi. So Dark covers The Thing. It's going to be Alien. It's going to be the original Nightmare on Elm Street. It's going to be the original Halloween. It's going to be the original Night of the Living Dead, and pretty much every Romero film after that. And Schneider's remake of Dawn of the Dead. Black Summer on Netflix was fantastic if you're into that. So I love everything. It's like there's just so much to gobble up.
So did you appreciate the Sam Raimi Doctor Strange?
I did.
And all the Evil Dead reference.
I did, and obviously Bruce Campbell.
Bruce Campbell's awesome.
Evil Dead Rise was also awesome.
I never saw that.
Yeah, that was pretty good. It's a complete departure, but very well done.
Yeah.
And creepy as hell. But yeah, Sam Raimi, I was hoping he would make it even more creepy. Doctor Strange.
That's one thing I like about the MCU. Some of the things I like. I tend to like the movies. I had this conversation. I used to do a podcast. I technically still do, but we haven't done it for a long time. Called Saints on Cinema, where it was two Mormon guys talking about movies, and we talked about. Ragnarok really kind of changed like the tenor of all the MCUs.
Yeah. Because
it felt to me when Ragnarok came out that they saw Guardians of the Galaxy was so successful. They're like, let's make Thor a little bit more like that. And then that was really successful. And now everybody's like that. Like they're all kind of have this plucky kind of gritty
DC
humor.
Had to pivot to try to make it their. I liked it when DC was dark and gritty.
Yeah.
I didn't need it to be Marvel want to be like junky and light and airy and vibrant colors. I wanted it to be dark, gritty, and just like the DC universe is supposed to be like. Right.
Well, the thing is though, is that the thing I liked about that Doctor Strange, the multiverse movie, was that it felt so different than all of the others.
Yeah.
And that was what I thought, that's what was the appeal. Because before Ragnarok, Thor had his movies had its very own feel. And Captain America had its very own feel. Iron Man had its very own feel, and now they all kind of feel the same, and so that one was different. But man, those evil. But back to the horror, the Evil Dead movies. They are my favorite. Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness. I've shown my kids edited versions of those movies, and the edited versions. There's this app called VidAngel you can get where you can choose. You can choose what you want out of it. So I didn't get any of the blood out of it, just the cussing and the part where the tree assaults the girl.
Yes.
But my boys loved it. My girls were disgusted, but my
as well, and that's good raising on your part that they would find disgusting. I will tell you, I saw Evil Dead the musical twice.
Oh, I'm gonna see it. I'm gonna see it in October.
I don't know. I saw mine like 20 years ago, but it was fantastic. This series, Ash vs. Evil Dead on Starz. Okay. Catch it if you haven't.
I haven't.
And the new Evil Dead Rise is fantastic, and even the remake they did where Ash was a girl. I can't remember her name. But that one I thought was fantastic too. So.
Interesting. Wow. And the one problem I do have showing my kids horror movies from my generation is that when you go back and you show them the animation, the CG, like the way they did it, like Nightmare on Elm Street, if you show it to a kid today, they're like, this was scary to you? This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I go, you don't understand though. This is all we had. We didn't have CGI back then. You know what I mean? Like, this was scary to us. And I showed him Nightmare on Elm Street, and my son was like, "This is pretty bad.
This is campy, man. Come on.
Yeah. But I do like the remake of what's the one the Pennywise
It. Yeah.
Oh, that was good too.
That was good, and now they're doing a Welcome to Derry prequel.
Oh, are they really?
The origin of Pennywise, or
interesting.
Pennywise was a teenager. I don't know how that works. They're doing a Welcome to Derry show or series.
Wow, yeah. So tell me, as far as like music and stuff, what are you into for music?
I haven't listened to like real music in forever. I'm always about podcasts. Every time I'm in my car, it's podcast or an audiobook from Stephen King. I was listening to tons of podcasts. Sia is one of my favorites.
Okay.
I like that. I like the Greatest Showman soundtrack that always makes me cry. But yeah, in all honesty, people have asked me that before, but I've always been pop. I've always been classic rock, hard rock. Again, in 80s, 90s, big hair bands. Pop, Smashing Pumpkins, Green Day, I was into that. Eve 6, Three Doors Down.
Oh yeah.
It just I like everything that was kind of main or off the main path when it came to music.
I'm in a couple of weeks. I'm taking my two boys to see Metallica down in LA, and I've seen them. This will be my 12th and 13th time seeing them. Nice. They are unbelievable live, unbelievable. And I mean, it's shocking how even in their, I think they're in their 60s at this point, they're still putting out music, and it's not bad. You know, like Smashing Pumpkins. I gotta say, I loved them, but I post Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, I stopped listening, and it got too gothic. And so they, this is what they do, right? They get up there and they play their new stuff, and then they occasionally play some old stuff, and then they play, and it's just like all the new stuff. I'm like, will you please play Cherub Rock? You know what I mean? Just play something, you know what I mean? Play something that we've all heard. But Metallica, they keep putting out music that if you're a Metallica fan, you love.
Yeah.
And it's just, and so I'm excited to take my kids to see them, and so that's going to be fun too. So what's next for Savannah Hauk?
Well, Savannah Hauk is doing a weekly podcast of her own with the co-host Julie Rubenstein. So we put that out every week. I'm always, tinkering around the post-production on that. Still doing Chuck does the horror podcast, Talk Horror to Me, on live stream, also using StreamYard every Sunday night at 7. I have 2 books. Savannah's working on 2 books right now. One is a sci-fi dystopian coming of age queer young adult book. as well as
Interesting.
the third book in the Living with Crossdressing series, which is going to talk all about gender and sexuality and the 47 different labels of what gender is and what that means and how do you describe it for yourself. So that's in the works this year. And then, just trying to, connect with people like you as well, just to get the word out and try to meet
Yeah.
people and just living my life and,
Uh,
paying the bills.
yeah, that's awesome. And let me ask you. This just came to my thought. There might be. Well, there's maybe two questions. One, there might be a kid out there, and I say this because I know that some of my kids' friends listen to this podcast trying to find information about my kids. but but there might be a kid out there who listens to this and they're struggling with their identity, gender, sexuality, something of that.
Yeah.
And even they might be someone like a Sonny Smith who is struggling with, like his thing was he's struggling with his gender identity and also trying to square that with his spiritual identity, because he part of his identity is he's Mormon, and that the doing that transitioning and his religious identity kind of conflicted for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
What would you recommend, or what would you say to a kid who is going through this type of issue with their identity?
I'll say a couple things. One, I had somebody approach me in a conference that I led who is Jewish, like Orthodox Jewish, also very similar problems spiritually about how do you reconcile dual genderness with their religion and their faith.
Yeah.
So that is definitely not Mormon specific. It's definitely across a lot of boards. I was on an airplane and it's 30,000 feet sitting next to a Baptist missionary, and we discussed Deuteronomy 22:5 and why that one sentence in the Bible means I can't dress this way because I'm an abomination to God. I don't cotton to that, so here I am. To anybody listening, whether it's a child, young adult, for me, like how I came to it is, and again, thank God for the internet these days, because I did not have that growing up. So if you can't find somebody you can speak to, looking online, finding local communities, finding a P flag. There in many states there are at school programs that can help you
Yeah.
find people to talk to like yourself. And again, when I say like yourself, you're still trying to find somebody like yourself to
Sure.
even talk to. So as I said earlier, it's all about like listen to every story. Listen to every story, everything you find online. Well, grain of truth. Don't take everything online.
Right.
Look at the source material. Make sure it's not an op-ed. Make sure it's got real grit to its validity. So please do that when you do anything online. But find people, find their stories, listen to the stories, and find what resonates for you. Do reading. Read books.
Yeah.
There's books out there. Read. Like be voracious in like getting information so that you can be smart, that you can be informed about what is it that you are. Because we're talking about gender. Gender is not sexuality, and sexuality is not social, and social is not religious. These things are all like different universes that like just they interact and intertwine, and it's a tapestry. But we always think that one informs the other, but in reality, you have to treat each thing as its own module, and then like see how it fits. How does it feel? If it's a religious conflict where my pastor or my rabbi or the Bible says X, but I believe in my heart Y, but I'm being told that I'm wrong, but I don't feel wrong. I feel like a regular person. I love God. It's like you have to start rationalizing who you are to yourself.
Yeah.
And not let, and unfortunately, I spent a lot of time assassinating everything I knew so that I could build myself from the ground up again and do it from a position of my own self-worth and my own self-concept. So it's hard. I spent decades doing it. I've written books about it, and that's helped. And for anybody, I could just say, if you're struggling, know that there are people out there. Know that you could find people to speak to. Know that you're not alone. Know that this is not like something that is again, without knowing the situation, Like, if you have the feeling in your heart of like, I feel like I'm attracted to X, or I feel like I want to dress like Y. I mean, in reality, who are you hurting? You're not hurting
Yeah.
anybody. It's just how you feel. And
Yeah.
again, if you do no harm to yourself and you do no harm to others, that's like my premise for trying to find out who you are in your most authentic state.
Yeah, 100%. You know, this religious question, this came up one time. I used to teach. Well, I used to teach a bunch of different classes at various churches, but one time I was teaching a class called Gospel Essentials, which was basically if you get baptized into the church, it's kind of like the basics, class for newer members or returning members. And someone asked me a question, and I don't remember exactly what the question was, but it was along the lines of, hey, I don't know how I feel about this idea that, and this is years and years ago, but they were like, gay people going to hell and all this stuff. I don't understand it. And my response at the time, and I think this is what I would say to anybody who's dealing with that religious situation. Well, God says this or God says that. I said to him, I go, listen, here's the thing. Like, first of all, we aren't the judge, thank goodness, right? God is a perfect judge. And God is going to judge you. If he's the perfect judge, I would think, actually back up, the question had to do with the whole nature versus nurture argument. Well, if gay people are born that way, why would God make it a sin? And, and then if they weren't, is it a nurture thing? And I said, listen, I don't think it really matters, okay? I said, because if God put something in somebody to make them that way, I think he's going to take that into account when you get to the judgment bar. And if somebody did something to you to make you that way, I think God's going to take that into account when you get to the judgment bar. I would like to think that God is merciful to everybody, given their circumstances. Because at least I hope when I get there, he's merciful to my situation.
I agree too. I mean, I will say I'm more spiritual than organized religious, but I agree. It's like, who are we to judge others? The Bible says it, that he is the final judge. He is the one that's going to do the work. So don't take it upon yourself because you're a mere mortal.
Well, and also another thing, my favorite story in the Bible, is the woman caught in adultery. I don't know if you know the story familiar. So Jesus is teaching a group of people, and the Pharisees and the Sadducees are basically the religious scholars of the time, and they bring this woman who was caught in adultery to him in front of the crowd, right? And they throw her in front of Jesus, and they say, okay, they call him Rabbi, Master, right? And they go, this woman was caught in adultery, caught in the very act. So they found her having adultery, cheating on her husband. And it says, the law says to stone her. What do you say? And Jesus just kind of wrote in the sand for a little while. And then and they kept asking and pressing him. And he said, he stood up and he looked at him. He said, "Let he is without sin cast the first stone at her."
That part I know.
Yeah. And then after that, well, here's the end of the story, though. This is what's interesting, is that they all left. It says that they all came to a realization of their own sins, and everybody left. And he was just left there with the woman. And the woman comes up to him and he says, "Where are thine accusers?" And they say, "There are none that accuse me." And he says, "Neither do I accuse thee. Go thy way and sin no more." And so when you have these people who are talking about Deuteronomy, which is like thousands of years before Christ came, and if you understand the theology of Christianity, Jesus changed all of those rules. It's the reason why we don't celebrate the Sabbath on Saturday. There's not a requirement for how many steps we can take on the Sabbath. There's no longer certain knots you can't tie on the Sabbath, unless you're Orthodox Jew.
Right.
You really don't. Christians don't practice any of the old Jewish Sabbath laws.
Yeah.
We don't animal sacrifice anymor.
What?
Right. I know. Well, you might.
Let me write that down. I've been doing it all wrong.
You are dual gender, so maybe you do. No, I'm just no, but
I'm an abomination. So
yeah. No, but my point is that so Jesus comes and fulfills the law. We don't do all those things. But this one reference that says you can't cross-dress, he didn't fulfill that one. That one's still there.
And God knows people were all wearing robes back then, so I'm not sure how you figure out what was female and male, but that's
Right. Well, and also, if that's true, you can't cross dress. Then the law says that if we catch a woman in adultery, we're supposed to stone her.
Yeah.
Or if a man rapes a woman, then he just has to go to his parents and pay for it and then marry her.
Yep.
You know, I mean, we don't follow any of those rules.
No, we don't. But
so it's it is a little bit of a it's a little bit of a trigger. Yeah, it's a trigger for me because I think a lot of people picking and choosing certain things for other things that they may view as quote unquote icky is a little problematic, especially when I know that I've been in leadership in my church, and I know for a fact that every single one of those people are dealing with something, something, and so they're just judging people who sin a little differently than they do.
Yeah,
You know.
I mean, I'm not going to look at these 600 and so mitzvot, Deuteronomic and Leviticus laws, but there's some good ones in there. Like, take the eggs out of the nest, not the mother. I mean, that's a good one. Put railings around your roof. That's a good one.
That's a good one.
Don't let your family. You like this as a lawyer because there's some civic ones in there. Family can't be used to testify against you. I mean, there's some goodies. There's some goodies in there.
We still use some of that. It's called the spousal communication privilege.
That's right. See, we're still doing some of it.
We still use some of that. So let me ask you. I appreciate you giving me the time, and I found this to be really refreshing and really a great conversation. I really have.
Thank you.
Let me ask you a few questions that I ask everybody. First, I would ask you, what would you say would be your biggest success in life?
I mean, I could go on with my, pedigree of things I've done and accomplished. In reality, it's going to be being the best me I can be and being the confident person that you mentioned. I must be pretty confident and content. I mean, this is my best achievement, what I'm doing right now.
Yeah. And it sounds like it wasn't always that way.
Nope.
How long
always
is it
positive, but not really confident. So
how long has it been since you've been this version of yourself? I mean, I know it's a constant. Really?
Yeah, like I said, since I came to South Carolina was the next pivot point of my evolution. So
wow,
we're talking 6 years to go from hidden away to fully just in view.
So there you have it, LGBTQ community. Move to red states. That's how you'll fulfill. Yeah. No.
This endorsement not.
Okay, the next one is, what do you view to be your biggest failure, and what did you learn from it?
I mean, it kind of goes back to what would you tell a kid who's struggling? I mean, I wish I would have got to my truth sooner, but I just don't think the resources were there. So I'm not really going to fault myself that as a failure. I did the best I could. Failure-wise, I mean, yeah, it's hard to say because, if it's not Savannah specific, I mean, I think I've done pretty well. I went to college, got 2 degrees, wrote some books, in relationships, some good, some not so good. So I don't think, I think we all fail. We all fall down.
Yeah.
But I can't really point to something that was wow, that was the worst thing I've done in my life.
Yeah. What are your degrees in?
I got 2 degrees in architecture.
Oh, nice.
And I've not worked a day in the field. So.
That happens to a lot of people.
So there you go, kids. Go to college.
Yeah. No, I tell my kids, and this was specific for me, I remember somebody telling me when they were going to college and they said they were going to go to law school, they said, I just want to be trained in something. He goes like I want to get a degree in something that makes me do a specific thing. And so that's what I kind of told my kids. I'm like, listen, you can do whatever you want, but I would tell you, as far as college, you should go to get trained for something specific, because if you just you get just this random business degree that doesn't really train you for anything in specific, it's hard to figure out what you truly want to do. You know what I mean? And so anyhow, here's the last question. It's someday, we hope it's years and years and years down the road, but someday you're going to pass away, and when you do, there'll be a funeral and someone will give your eulogy. What's the one thing you hope somebody would say in your eulogy?
I don't know, maybe some cool reference from a AC song, or maybe some quote that I am Iron Man. I don't know, something like that. But if I the one thing I would hope to leave this planet with as a legacy is if that person is eulogizing me said that I made a difference in some small part to their life.
Oh yeah. It's
That's
funny. It's funny you bring up a different quote. I actually have it in my estate plan that on my tombstone, it has to say, "My body lies, but still I roam." From Metallica's "Wherever I May Roam."
there you
That's
go.
I put that
See?
on there. So, yeah. But well, I have really appreciated this conversation, and I appreciate you being so willing to have difficult conversation. You know, like I know that some of those questions may have come off a little, make like I think uncomfortable conversations are good sometimes because it's uncomfortable because people are really passionate about it, you know, and I think that more conversations like this are needed to kind of bridge the gaps.
Yeah, but as long as any conversation can be uncomfortable as long as it's not come at with judgment
Yeah,
or with
yeah,
blame, then a
yeah.
conversation is so much more worth having.
Right. Well, and I hope, for anybody listening to this, I hope the whole purpose of this podcast has been to give people an opportunity to hear a perspective from somebody else to realize they're having a very real human experience. And you definitely are. And, I've had people tell me, I read one on a Just Me podcast, the first one I did. And a listener wrote in and said, I don't have to, he said, I could even I could even listen to the drag queen episodes, even if I don't endorse that, I could at least understand that they're
Yeah.
coming to something. And I shared this story a few times. I did I did a podcast early on, and I'm really proud of it, with someone who's polyamorous, who's a Mormon, and now her and her husband are participating in a polyamorous relationship. And her sister, she did it anonymously, but her sister heard the podcast and knew it was her, and didn't know that, like, and when she started sharing her childhood, recognized it was her. And she sent me a message, and she was like kind of upset at first that, like, I don't agree with some of the things that she's saying and all this stuff. And I told her, I said, I go, hey, listen, I can't confirm or deny, but I said, but I do want you to know that what she's saying is a very real experience for her, and it's not something novel. This is something for her. I think if you listen to it with an ear to understand rather than to respond, maybe you'll learn something about your sister. And she sent me a message a couple days later saying she'd actually set up a time. Her and her sister had been estranged, and they're going to talk.
Oh.
And I don't know if the conversation happened or not, but I'll tell you that if it did, I don't care what happens with these podcasts anymore. It was a success.
There you go.
And so I hope that this one was a success. I've had a great time. And you know what? I was thinking, I used to do with Saints on Cinema, my friend will get really mad that I'm considering this, but we used to do top 7. We used to do top 7 lists on movies. And I was thinking, I want to do like just a bunch of different top 7 lists. Maybe I'll have you come back and we can do a top 7 horror movies and see if we can.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh hell yeah.
Yeah, right on. And then we'll do a crossover so that way you can your horror podcast. Why don't you once again, one more time, plug your podcasts?
All right. Well, gee, so much things. The Fox and the Famous podcast is the one the Savannah and Julie do, which is all about demystifying the cross-dressing experience. For Chuck, you have the Talk Horror to Me podcast, which is a live stream that you can find on YouTube and Facebook. What else you want to know? I got the 2 Living with Cross-Dressing books. You can get those on Amazon. And if anybody from listening to the show wants to reach out to me, they can do the Contact Us page on the livingwithcrossdressing.com site. That way they can get to me, but I'm also on social, Savannah Hauk on Facebook, on Instagram. So just look for the HAUK and you should find me pretty quick.
Awesome. Well, Savannah, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. Anybody who's listened to this, please subscribe. We got a lot more exciting ones coming up. And, like I said, we'll have you back for sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. This was a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you.